The Kremlin insists it never planned to invade Ukraine, but it was forced to do so when Kiev started its program to join NATO. Well, this is not entirely true, and today we will try to figure out what Russia really doesn't want you to know about your history. Welcome to my channel. As far back as 1997, the Kremlin was already worried that Ukraine would join NATO and that the Americans would put missiles there. But in 2008, Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin stated that NATO's eastward expansion was a serious provocation that reduced mutual trust. He said that the alliance had put its frontline forces on our borders, and although the North Atlantic Treaty does not define the notion of aggression, Article 5 states that an armed attack against one ally will be an attack on all allies. So, basically, he's saying if they attack any NATO member, then all members have to attack them back. In 2014, after the Maidan coup d'etat in Ukraine, when pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych was ousted, replaced by the pro-European integration government, and then Russia annexed Crimea and started supporting separatists in Donbass, Putin told the German chancellor that Ukraine was finished as a country and that it would never join NATO now. In 2021, while giving a speech in Moscow, Putin once again mentioned that Ukraine was trying to join NATO and that Americans were going to put missiles there, promising that it would become a tragedy for Ukraine, and then he added that Ukraine itself is finished as a country. These claims about Ukraine joining NATO and the U.S. putting missiles there are a repetition of the propaganda from 1961 when the Berlin crisis occurred. Back then, the Americans agreed not to put missiles there, and this agreement was supposed to be honored until 2026. So basically, according to Putin's logic, we just have to invade Ukraine, and we can take their territory without anyone saying anything. But wait a minute. Did NATO really make such an agreement? Or is it all a lie the Kremlin used to justify its war? As always, let's look at the facts. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union supported opposing alliances of states, and during this time, many countries in Western Europe felt threatened by the Soviets. This is why the U.S. set up the North Atlantic Treaty, inviting 12 countries to join the alliance. After World War II, the Soviet Union occupied 4 Eastern European countries, divided Germany into 4 occupation zones, and created a communist regime in Poland. This was justified by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. However, secretly, both nations had plans to destroy each other, and when Hitler decided to break the deal, the Soviets had to quickly turn the people in those areas against the Nazis and switch from being occupiers to liberators. At the end of World War II, the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin wanted to create a buffer zone between Russia and Europe. This is why, after the war, the Soviet Union kept control over Eastern Europe and installed communist governments in the region. The Soviets claimed they were protecting these countries from Western imperialism and fascism, but they were actually preventing them from leaving the Soviet sphere of influence. After the end of the Cold War in 1991, the Warsaw Pact lost its meaning. Its purpose was to protect the Soviet Union from Western aggression, and now no one needed it anymore. Many people in Eastern Europe started demanding independence. They got fed up with living under the Soviet system where human rights were restricted, freedom of speech was limited, and the economy was centrally planned by the state. In 1989, many of the nations in Eastern Europe rose up against their communist leaders who were installed by the Soviet Union and demanded a new future for themselves. The government of East Germany allowed its citizens to travel to West Germany, which caused massive migration. And shortly after that, the Berlin Wall fell down. In 1990, communism fell apart in Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and the rest of the Soviet republics. By the end of 1991, the Soviet Union, which was being led by Mikhail Gorbachev, collapsed and gave way to modern Russia and the other 14 Soviet republics. Many scholars say that the collapse of the Soviet Union was caused by internal problems within the nation, like the growing gap between the rich and poor, the arms race with the United States, and the inability to reform the failing economy. But some say that it was the westward expansion of NATO that pushed the Soviet leaders to keep repressing their population and wasting billions of dollars on weapons. And they are partially right. In 1989, a group of Polish scholars led by historian Zbigniew Brzezinski published a book called The Grand Chessboard: American Primacy and Its Geopolitical Imperatives. The authors argued that American security relied on keeping the Soviet Union away from the Atlantic Ocean, and this could only be done by surrounding Moscow with anti-Soviet countries. They also said that the U.S. should use the resources of these countries to keep the Soviets weak. The book became very influential among policymakers in Washington, and some believed that the U.S. government used it to trick the Soviet leaders into thinking that they would be threatened if they didn't stay far away from the ocean. Let's go back to the main question. Did NATO make an agreement with the Soviet Union in 1990 that they wouldn't expand near Russia? No, they didn't. Although some high-ranking NATO members made casual remarks that they would not add former Soviet republics to the alliance, there was no treaty. There was the famous Chicken Kiev meeting between George H.W. Bush and Mikhail Gorbachev in July 1991, when Bush allegedly promised Gorbachev that NATO would stop expanding east. But like most conversations between leaders, there's no evidence that such an agreement actually took place. There are just written records of the meeting that say they talked about it. When Lithuania became the first former Soviet republic to join NATO in 2004, the Kremlin was furious. But when Estonia, Latvia, and the 3 Baltic states joined the alliance, the Russians went crazy. The president of Russia at the time, Vladimir Putin, tried to convince the new NATO members that they had made a mistake and offered them membership in a new Russian-led Eurasian Union. But the plan failed. It's important to remember that Russia used the same rhetoric in 2008 when they invaded Georgia, promising that they weren't planning to do so but were forced to when Georgia tried to join NATO. The problem is that Georgia never applied for NATO membership, and they were never going to join the alliance anytime soon. If you think about it, Russia has always reacted negatively to the westward expansion of NATO. In 1952, when West Germany applied for NATO membership, the Soviets responded by denouncing the Paris Accords and blocking West Germany from participating in the organization. When the alliance admitted Spain in 1982, the Soviets condemned it and started targeting NATO countries with political repression. When the alliance admitted Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Albania, Croatia, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovenia, and of course Ukraine and North Macedonia, Russia felt surrounded and threatened. Although many scholars agree that NATO played a role in the fall of the Soviet Union, saying that the westward expansion pushed the Kremlin to keep repressing their population and waste billions of dollars on weapons, there's no denying that the Soviet Union was already falling apart internally by the late 1980s. And the end of the Cold War wasn't caused by one single factor, but rather a combination of many things. Why did the Soviet Union invade Afghanistan? What was the impact of the arms race on the Soviet economy? How did Mikhail Gorbachev try to save his empire? Why did the Berlin crisis happen in 1961? What were the main differences between the Soviet and American strategies in the Cold War? All of these questions and more will be answered in future episodes. So subscribe if you don't want to miss out. And thank you for watching. To get more videos like this, click here. Now check out this video and learn something new every day.